What happened to the Nazis after World War II? This is a question that has been asked by many people, and there is still no clear answer. Some say that they fled to South America, while others believe that they went into hiding. So in this video, we will explore the different theories about what happened to the Nazis after the war. So watch the video until the end. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. The majority of the Nazi leaders were killed or missing at the end of World War II, meaning that the Allies defeated the Nazis in World War II. The Allied powers were made up of the US, UK, and Russia. The Nazis fought against these three countries for control over Europe after Hitler took power in Germany and then launched an attack on Poland, which started World War II. He also invaded France, but was stopped at Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, France. After this defeat, it looked like his reign would come to an end, but he managed to escape from Berlin with his mistress Eva Braun, who committed suicide when Hitler died later that same day. Those who were not killed or missing included officers of the Army, Navy, and SS, who were tried before special military tribunals, which varied between countries. The first trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany, by an international tribunal under US jurisdiction and law. The defendants included Hermann Göring, the head of Luftwaffe, Rudolf Hess, a former deputy Führer, and others. They were charged with crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. They also faced trial for their roles in the Holocaust against Jews. The Nuremberg trials had three chief objectives: to punish those responsible for starting World War II, to prevent similar wars from happening again, to identify what can be done as nations become more modernized. The debate over whether particular leaders should be punished involved a lot more than just that question. Should they be punished individually or as part of an organization? For example, Hermann Göring was one of Hitler's closest associates during his rule. He was also considered one of Germany's most powerful men during World War II. There are many examples where he had access to sensitive information about other high-ranking Nazis that could have been used against them if it wasn't for him being too busy fighting off attacks from Soviet troops on German soil. He died later. Ultimately, though, it came down to what kind of punishment would make sense given these circumstances. Would it make sense for someone like Göring, who committed such heinous acts, to go free because he wasn't able to control himself? Or should we punish all Germans who participated in these atrocities because they helped create such terrible conditions throughout Europe? In 1945, the Allied powers wanted to remove the Nazi ideology from Germany. They tried to remove all Nazi influences from the German education system, media, and public life. The Allies also wanted to remove any symbols that represented Nazism, such as flags or emblems on uniforms. No longer would people be able to wear these items openly without fear of being fined by police officers who were enforcing this law at the time, or even arrested. After World War II, the number of Nazis who were tried by Allied courts-martial and executed without trial was staggering. At least 1,600 were sentenced to death, with another 4,000 being found guilty and sentenced to prison terms, but only 245 served their time. The Soviets also had their fair share of Nazis to deal with. During the war itself, Soviet officials believed some 84% of Germans were Nazi sympathizers or members, a figure that's likely higher than reality because many Germans who fought for Hitler did so out of fear rather than loyalty. However, even after Germany's defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943 and subsequently losing much territory, Hitler still had enough power to keep his forces together as they attempted to flee through occupied territory toward Switzerland or France before being pushed back into Germany proper by Soviet forces led by Marshal Zhukov himself. The Nazis were able to evade capture for years. Many of them fled to South America, where they found support from former SS officers and other high-ranking Nazi officials. As you might expect, the Nazis were not all killed or captured. Many of them escaped to other countries and continued their activities there. The most famous of these was Adolf Hitler himself, who fled Germany after World War II began and lived out his life in Argentina. The Nazis weren't all tried and convicted either. Some were given immunity from prosecution under international law due to atrocities committed by their countrymen during World War II. For example, Joseph Mengele. Others were punished by other countries, for example, Heinrich Himmler. And still, others went unpunished altogether, like former SS officer Jacob Raymer, who killed 7 people before committing suicide when he learned he'd been sentenced to death after being found guilty of treason against Germany itself. The role of Nazi hunters in tracking down fugitives was important, but it was not the only part they played. As time went on and more people were arrested and sentenced to prison camps, other organizations were created to provide support for them. One such organization is called the Simon Wiesenthal Center, SWC. The SWC works with groups all over the world who want to help victims of Nazi war crimes or their families find closure by learning about their pasts through research and education. They also work closely with governments who are trying to track down any remaining Nazis still alive today so that justice can be served upon them. The Nazis' crimes against humanity were so terrible that even some German soldiers created evidence to convict their superiors. It's hard to imagine that any soldier would want to turn in his or her leader, but this was the reality for many German soldiers during World War II. The only way they could avoid being punished themselves was by proving that those above them were worse than them. In some cases, there was little doubt about the guilt of the accused, but in others, there was much more controversy about what constituted a crime. The legal definition of war crimes is very similar to that which applies to ordinary crimes against humanity: killing civilians and non-combatants, attacking civilian objects or infrastructure, etc. There are also similarities between crimes committed during the war and those committed after it, such as attacking hospitals and religious institutions. See the section below. War crimes are usually prosecuted under international law. However, there are also specific laws relating specifically to them in many countries, including Germany and Japan after World War II. Some people believed that a soldier should only be punished for traditional war crimes, like killing prisoners of war, whereas others felt that even those who ordered massacres of civilians could be tried for crimes against peace. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg was set up to try German officers and other officials involved in acts of aggression during World War II. It heard evidence from some 170 witnesses and sentenced 24 major Nazi leaders to death. They were hanged on October 16, 1946. The first American military tribunal also took place after World War II. It convicted 10 Japanese officers responsible for waging biological warfare on China's part during World War II. They were executed by hanging on July 29, 1948. The issue of whether German soldiers should be punished for carrying out orders from their superiors became a major topic of debate after the war. The most famous case was that of Adolf Eichmann, who was captured by British forces and tried in Jerusalem, where he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and hanged. There are several estimates for how many people were executed without trial after the war. Some argue that as many as 3 million German soldiers had been executed for refusing to kill prisoners, whereas other estimates put this number at less than 100. The number of people killed by their countrymen during World War II is difficult to pin down because there were so many different groups involved, and because every country's record-keeping was different. It's thought that about 2 million Soviet people died during World War II, while around 20 million Jews were murdered by Germans during the Holocaust alone. And those numbers don't even include other victims like Roma or handicapped individuals who died while being sent off on death trains or by being shot. Other estimates have suggested that up to 2 million German soldiers may have been tried by Allied courts-martial during World War II and executed without trial after it ended, about 20% of those indicted. The trials were conducted in secret, with no record kept of who was convicted or sentenced to death. Some scholars believe the numbers are exaggerated. Others claim they can be traced back to eyewitnesses who witnessed executions at gunpoint, which would make them more reliable than official records. The vast majority of historians seem to agree that less than 20,000 people were executed without trial after World War II. In other words, they all agree that the number of people who died in Nazi concentration camps is far smaller than what has been claimed by Holocaust deniers. However, there's still some debate about how many were killed. Some scholars believe that around 50,000 were killed during World War II. Others argue that it could be as high as 10 million or even 20 million. Although the Nazis lost the war, many of them were able to escape punishment by fleeing to South America. Others were captured and tried at the Nuremberg trials. Some committed suicide to avoid capture. Today, there are still active neo-Nazi groups around the world. We hope you found this video interesting and informative. And if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.